In a city where time travel wasn't just a luxury but a chaotic norm, Jake Hargrove had carved out his niche as a time crime detective. Tall and lanky with perpetually tousled hair, Jake was the kind of guy who looked like he'd just rolled out of bed, and maybe he had. He had an uncanny ability to turn even the most serious situations into a comedy routine. With a penchant for bad puns and a wardrobe that seemed to scream, "I gave up," he was a local legend in the time regulation agency, or, more accurately, the butt of every joke at the office. It was a Monday, the kind of day that felt like it had been stretching on since last week. Jake sat slumped over a table at a hipster coffee shop, the kind with artisanal beans and pretentious names. He was trying to order a simple coffee but kept getting distracted by the barista, who had an inexplicable affinity for a full medieval knight's outfit. The guy was frothing milk while decked out in chainmail, and Jake couldn't help but mutter, "I'll take a latte, but make sure it's knighted first." After several awkward exchanges, which included a mix-up that resulted in him receiving a dinosaur smoothie, Jake finally settled down with his unusual drink, fully aware that he should have just ordered regular coffee. As he sipped the thick, green concoction, he noticed a figure lurking outside the cafe, dressed in a trench coat and sunglasses, at least 3 years out of fashion. A shiver ran down his spine. The guy was definitely up to no good. Jake sprang into action, abandoning his smoothie. He chased the trench-coated man into an alley, weaving through the eclectic mix of street vendors and time travelers hawking their wares. Just as he was about to tackle the suspect, a flash of light erupted from a nearby alleyway, and before Jake could even blink, he was sucked into a swirling vortex, smoothie cup flying from his hand like a startled pigeon. When the world stopped spinning, Jake found himself standing in the middle of a medieval battlefield. Knights clashed around him, swords clanging, and smoke billowing from a nearby catapult. "Oh great, I'm stuck in a history lesson," he groaned, trying to duck as an armored knight nearly knocked him over. But before he could even catch his breath, he spotted the trench-coated figure standing atop a hill, looking rather pleased with himself. "What are you doing here?" Jake yelled, feeling utterly ridiculous yelling at a criminal while dressed in a t-shirt and jeans, flanked by sword-wielding warriors. "Just picking up a delivery," the figure shot back, smirking. "You're late, detective." Jake blinked. "Late? You're the one who brought me here." With a casual wave, the man pointed toward the horizon where a massive time portal shimmered like a mirage. "You want to know what's going on? Catch me if you can." And just like that, the trench coat flapped dramatically as the man leaped through the portal, leaving Jake standing in a sea of chaos. Shaking his head, he raced after him, leaping through the shimmering doorway and feeling the familiar sensation of being stretched like a rubber band. When he landed, he was back in his own time, sprawled out in the same coffee shop, now drenched in his smoothie. The patrons stared at him, their faces a mixture of confusion and mild amusement. He glanced at the barista, who was now surprisingly back in a polo shirt. "I'll take that latte, please," he muttered, trying to regain his composure, determined to catch the trench-coated man and get to the bottom of this mess. Jake kicked into detective mode. He spent the next few days interviewing witnesses, a chaotic endeavor that led him to an eccentric inventor named Dr. Zed, who looked like he belonged in a steampunk novel. Dr. Zed was knee-deep in what could only be described as an amalgamation of old clock parts and wild ideas. "Ah, Jake. What brings you to my lab of wonders?" Dr. Zed exclaimed, wearing goggles that were far too large for his face. "Time travel troubles," Jake replied, flinging his hands up. "I need to know about a guy in a trench coat who's jumping timelines. Any chance you've seen him?" Dr. Zed rubbed his chin, his eyes narrowing. "Trench coat, you say? That sounds like one of those Chrono Syndicate types." Chrono Syndicate? Jake repeated, a tingle of dread creeping up his spine. They're a bunch of crooks who mess with time for profit. Very bad news, I assure you, Dr. Zed said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They'll do anything to change history to their advantage. Jake's gut twisted as he considered the implications. If the syndicate was involved, things were about to get messy. Armed with this new information, he delved deeper into the underbelly of the time travel world, visiting seedy bars where time travelers exchanged tall tales, and piecing together snippets of conversation like a jigsaw puzzle. Last week, they dropped a load of Renaissance art into the 21st century, one traveler recounted, eyes wide with excitement. Can you believe it? Da Vinci's sketches. Worth a fortune. Where's the syndicate now? Jake pressed, trying to mask his mounting anxiety. They're holed up in an abandoned time capsule near the 18th century warehouse district, the traveler said, glancing over his shoulder. But watch yourself, they don't take kindly to snoopers. Jake took a deep breath. He wasn't just a time detective for nothing, he had dealt with worse before, mostly involving rogue time tourists who thought it was a good idea to snap selfies with historical figures. But this felt different. After preparing for the confrontation with the syndicate, Jake's heart raced as he approached the decrepit time capsule, a relic of the early days of time travel. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and he could hear the muffled sound of voices inside. All right, Jake, you got this, he muttered to himself, psyching himself up. As he burst through the door, Jake was met with a scene straight out of a spy movie. The room was dimly lit, and figures darted about, discussing their next moves. But his eyes were immediately drawn to the trench-coated man at the center of it all, a smug smile plastered across his face. Ah, the great Jake Hargrove has finally graced us with his presence, the man announced dramatically. I've been expecting you. Funny, Jake shot back, trying to sound more confident than he felt. I was just about to crash your little party. The man's grin widened. You have no idea what's at stake, do you? You see, while you've been bumbling around, I've been orchestrating something much bigger. Jake's mind raced. Bigger? Like a time heist? You're just a thief dressed like a bad spy. Oh, but it's more than that. The man's eyes glinted with mischief. This is about rewriting history itself, and you, he pointed at Jake, you're the key. Me? Jake raised an eyebrow. You must have the wrong guy. I barely remember what I had for breakfast. With a flick of his wrist, the trench-coated man activated a device that projected images around the room, various timelines, history altered, realities shifting. Jake's heart sank as he watched snippets of his own life, including moments he thought were long gone, tangled in the web of this twisted scheme. Every choice you've made has led us here, the man continued, his voice laced with a strange admiration. You're the only one who can help me finalize my plan. Jake's mind reeled. This was his past, his choices and missteps brought to life in a way that felt terrifyingly real. But as he scanned the room, his resolve hardened. You think I'm going to help you rewrite history? Not a chance. In a split second, the two men charged at each other. The ensuing struggle was nothing short of absurd, pushing and shoving, both men trying to get a grip on the bizarre device. During the chaos, Jake recalled a gadget Dr. Zed had given him, a ridiculously oversized rubber band that supposedly could bind anything. Desperately, he grabbed it from his pocket, flinging it at the man. It stretched in mid-air, catching the trench-coated figure off guard and binding his arms. The device clattered to the ground, the projected images flickering and then dying out completely. Looks like you're all tied up, Jake quipped, panting but feeling a surge of triumph. The room erupted into confusion as the other members of the syndicate scrambled. Jake took advantage of the chaos, grabbing the device and making a break for it. He could hear shouts and the sound of footsteps behind him, but adrenaline surged through him. He raced through the corridors of the time capsule, leaping through doorways, dodging grasping hands. Once outside, he didn't stop running until he reached the familiar neon lights of his city. Panting, he paused to catch his breath, the thrill of the chase still coursing through his veins. A week later, Jake stood in the Time Regulation Agency's briefing room, his hair looking slightly less disheveled, and a small smirk on his face. "So, let me get this straight," he began, addressing the bewildered agents in the room. "I just saved the timeline, caught a criminal, and I didn't even have to change out of my favorite t-shirt." The agents exchanged glances, half exasperated and half amused. Jake had a knack for turning even the most dire situations into a comedic monologue, and this was no exception. Later that day, as he returned to the coffee shop, now free of smoothie stains and with a hint of confidence, he pondered the wild journey he had been on. The barista, still dressed in his medieval garb, greeted him with a cheerful nod. "Back for more?" he asked, eyeing Jake's hopeful expression. "Just a latte this time, knighted if possible," Jake replied with a grin. As he waited for his order, a file slipped onto his table, thick and stamped with a big red "Urgent." Curiosity piqued, he opened it to find details about a new case involving time anomalies. "Well, here we go again," he muttered, raising an eyebrow. And as he took a sip of his perfectly brewed coffee, a hint of excitement danced in his chest. Time had its quirks, but Jake Hargrove was ready to embrace them, one ridiculous adventure at a time. Jake leaned back in his chair, the fresh aroma of coffee swirling around him, mingling with the anticipation of what lay ahead. He flipped through the case file, the urgency of its contents pulling him in. Time anomalies were popping up all over the place, but this one seemed particularly bizarre. Reports of people experiencing déjà vu on a grand scale, as if moments from their lives were being replayed, slightly altered each time. His mind raced. Could this be linked to the Chrono Syndicate? Had his confrontation with the trench-coated man unleashed something more sinister? He needed answers, and fast. As he set the file down, a familiar voice broke through his thoughts. "Looks like someone's been busy," Dr. Zed said, sliding into the seat across from him, his wild hair barely contained by a headband. "I got your message about the anomalies." It sounded urgent. "Yeah, urgent is one way to put it," Jake replied, scanning the cafe for eavesdroppers. "People are reliving moments, but not in the way you'd expect. It's more like, timelines are overlapping, and everyone's stuck in this weird loop. I think it's connected to what the syndicate was planning." Dr. Zed's eyes widened. "That's not good. If they've figured out how to manipulate time on a large scale, we could have serious consequences." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "We have to find out what they're up to before it spirals out of control. Do you have anything in your lab that can help us track these anomalies?" "I might have just the thing," Dr. Zed said, a glint of excitement lighting up his face. "A temporal scanner. It's not fully calibrated, but it should be able to detect distortions in the timeline. Let's get to work." They rushed to Dr. Zed's lab, a chaotic haven filled with gadgets, half-finished inventions, and the unmistakable scent of burnt toast. Dr. Zed had a habit of multitasking with breakfast and experimentation. As they rummaged through a maze of machinery, Jake couldn't help but smile at the sight. This was home ground for him, the kind of chaotic creativity that sparked ideas. After some tinkering, Dr. Zed activated the scanner, a device resembling a mix between a high-tech compass and an old-school radio. It whirred to life, its screen flickering with readings. There. Dr. Zed pointed excitedly. It's picking up distortions in the downtown area. Looks like we have a hot spot. Let's roll, Jake said, adrenaline pumping through him as they raced out of the lab and into the streets. The downtown area was abuzz with people, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The energy in the air felt charged, almost electric. As they walked, he noticed snippets of conversation that seemed oddly familiar, strange echoes of the past. A couple nearby argued about a restaurant they had just visited, but Jake could swear he had heard that exact argument weeks ago. He shared a glance with Dr. Zed, who nodded, his expression serious. See what I mean? Jake murmured, his pulse quickening. This is exactly what we're dealing with. They approached the spot where the scanner had indicated the strongest distortion. It was a park, usually a serene escape from the chaos of the city, but today, it felt like a stage for something more sinister. Jake activated his own time detection device, a sleek wristwatch that blinked ominously as it synced with the scanner. Just then, a flash caught his eye. A group of people stood in a huddle, their faces displaying a mix of confusion and fear. Jake and Dr. Zed made their way over, and as they approached, a voice broke through the chatter. It happened again, a woman exclaimed, her eyes wide with disbelief. I swear I just saw my dog running past me, but I don't even have a dog. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. This was just the kind of anomaly they were tracking. He stepped forward, trying to calm the crowd. Everyone, listen. We're here to help. Can you tell us what you saw? Another person spoke up, a man with disheveled hair. I was just sitting on a bench, and suddenly, it was like I was reliving my lunch from last week. I thought I had left my sandwich at home, but it was right there in my bag. Sounds like a time loop, Dr. Zed said, his brow furrowing. If multiple people are experiencing the same moments, it indicates a serious rift in the timeline. Jake nodded, urgency building. We need to isolate the epicenter of these disturbances. If we can find out where they're coming from, we might be able to stop this before it gets worse. The crowd murmured, a mix of skepticism and hope. Suddenly, Jake's wristwatch beeped, signaling a spike in activity nearby. Over there, he said, pointing toward a grove of trees where the energy seemed to pulsate. Let's check it out. As they approached the trees, the air grew thick with tension. The scanner began to whir faster, its screen flickering with erratic readings. Just then, a flash of light erupted from within the grove, and Jake felt an overwhelming force push him back. He stumbled, regaining his balance just in time to see the source of the disturbance, a shimmering portal, its edges crackling with energy. Jake! Dr. Zed shouted, his voice strained. It's destabilizing. We need to get out of here. But before they could retreat, a figure emerged from the portal, cloaked in shadows. The trench-coated man stepped forward, a sly smile creeping across his face. You really thought you could stop this, didn't you? Jake's heart sank. You again? What do you want? What do I want? The man echoed, laughter dancing in his voice. I want to take control of time itself. You've been a thorn in my side long enough, Jake. But this time, it's different. This time, I have the power. With a wave of his hand, the man triggered a surge of energy that swept through the park, warping the surroundings. Jake felt his senses reel as flashes of alternate realities collided, an old version of himself, an imaginary scene of him winning a Time Detective Award, and even a glimpse of a future where the city was ruled by time-traveling tyrants. Dr. Zed. Jake yelled, trying to keep his footing. We need to counter this energy. On it. Dr. Zed shouted back, frantically adjusting the scanner, trying to calibrate it to absorb the chaotic energy. I just need a moment. Make it quick. Jake urged, focusing on the trench-coated man. You're playing with forces you don't understand. The man chuckled darkly. Oh, but I do. I know exactly what I'm doing. And soon, everyone will be living my perfect version of time. Jake's mind raced. He couldn't let this happen. He had to think fast. Drawing on the lessons learned from his previous encounter, he remembered the rubber band, now a symbol of creativity and quick thinking. We need to redirect the energy, not just absorb it, he shouted. Dr. Zed's eyes lit up with understanding. Right. If we can create a feedback loop, we might just collapse the portal and stabilize the timeline. Let's do it. Jake urged, adrenaline surging through him as he grabbed the rubber band from his pocket again, feeling the weight of it in his hand. With renewed determination, they sprang into action. Dr. Zed calibrated the scanner, and Jake prepared the rubber band, ready to unleash its power. The trench-coated man, sensing their plan, intensified the energy around him, sending shockwaves that threatened to rip the park apart. Stop them, he shouted to the shadows swirling around him, but Jake and Dr. Zed were undeterred. With a swift motion, Jake launched the rubber band at the portal, aiming for the core of the energy. The moment it made contact, the band snapped back, creating a stunning burst of light that reverberated through the air. Time itself seemed to pause as the energies clashed, a kaleidoscope of moments spiraling around them. Jake felt a surge of hope. It's working. Keep it steady. Dr. Zed adjusted the scanner, guiding the flow of energy, channeling it into the rubber band's rebound. With each pulse, the portal shrank, flickering dangerously as the trench-coated man screamed in frustration, "No. You can't do this," he howled, reaching out as the vortex began to collapse, but it was too late. The combined force of Jake's ingenuity and Dr. Zed's brilliance created a shockwave that sent the man stumbling back. With one final burst of energy, the portal imploded, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air. Jake and Dr. Zed stood panting, the tension dissipating around them as the park returned to its serene state. The crowd, once caught in a temporal loop, blinked in confusion but gradually began to understand that the chaos had ended. Did we do it? Jake asked, still catching his breath. Looks like it, Dr. Zed replied, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. We stabilized the timeline. The crowd erupted into applause, relief washing over them. Jake felt a swell of pride. They had done it, against all odds. They had thwarted the syndicate's plans and restored order. As the last echoes of applause faded, Jake turned to Dr. Zed. What now? Do we need to keep an eye out for any more anomalies? Dr. Zed chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, I'm sure there will always be something to monitor. Time travel is never a dull affair. But for now, let's celebrate our victory. Sounds like a plan, Jake agreed, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. They made their way out of the park, laughing and sharing ridiculous theories about time travel over lunch at their favorite diner. As they walked, Jake felt a sense of hope. The world was chaotic, sure, but in the midst of the madness, he had found camaraderie, purpose, and a renewed passion for his work. But as they reached the diner's entrance, a flicker of movement caught Jake's eye. He turned, just in time to see a familiar shadow slip around the corner, a trench coat disappearing into the distance. His heart raced, and he exchanged a knowing glance with Dr. Zed. I have a feeling this isn't over. Nope, Dr. Zed said with a grin. but we'll be ready for whatever comes next." And with that, they stepped into the diner, ready for their next adventure, knowing that time would keep throwing challenges their way, but they'd face them together, one ridiculous moment at a time.